Good afternoon from a very sunny Amsterdam, and thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar, Beyond Compliance, where we'll be looking at the newest circular economy standards and how they can bring value for your organization. We're really happy for all of you to join us today in this webinar, which is much anticipated, because we know that there has been a lot of updates in the field of circular economy metrics, whether it's just a couple of days ago from the European context, and we'll speak a bit more about the CSRD and everything happening there, to just a month ago in Belém during the COP, where the Global Circularity Protocol was launched. We see a lot of movement. And what we want to do today in this webinar is shed light on all of that movement. And we are really convinced that with all of this, there are key opportunities ahead to leverage all of these metrics for the benefit of driving real circular change. But what we also know, and this is based on the conversations and actually which led us to organize this webinar, is that there is a lot unclear with all of this movement. Another part which I would like to commemorate is that this is the first webinar we as Current are organizing. And for those of you who don't know Current, Jacco and I started Current just a couple of months ago with one clear idea, and that is to move the circular economy forward. And today is really packed, this hour is really packed with all of the things we're passionate about. It's about rigor, it's about metrics, it's about data. But above and beyond, it is about driving real change for the circular economy. And that's also where we see good news and a lot of positive hooks in everything that's coming our way. So the goal of today is for you to walk away not only with a better understanding of that landscape, but also to dive deep. And for that, we're really helpful and we're really proud to have two key speakers. We're joined today by Delphine Garin, Manager Circular Finance and Data at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Delphine has really been a key player in developing the Global Circularity Protocol. So we would really like to dive deep with her on that particular element. And then we're also joined by Harald Tepper. Harald Tepper is Global Head of Circular Economy and eco-design at Philips, and he's been really at the forefront of deploying circular metrics in the business context. So we're really hoping to dive deep in what it practically means in a large organization like Philips to make this come out. A couple of highlights on hygiene. So we're gonna spend about an hour in this webinar. It's gonna be packed, it's gonna be fast-paced, so be prepared for that. There is a Q&A function, so please try to find it. If you can't, put it in the chat and we'll help you. And I also want to point out that this session will be recorded and that we're also making this available after the webinar. So with that, I would like to quickly zoom out a bit, because I think having spent so much time in the circular space, it's always good to look at the macro level. And what we see, I think, are three big trends. And of course, it's always good to see where we stand when we look at the figures, the hard figures when it comes to circularity. And what else better to reference there than Circle Economy Circularity Gap Report? Because we have seen that global circularity has been in steadily decline. But against that sobering fact, we also see a lot of movement in the right direction. And I think one key element here is harmonization. I think over the last 15 years, we have been moving from a field of pioneering efforts when it comes to metrics, when it comes to businesses really getting their toes wet in terms of circularity, to a point where we're converging on how do we define circularity, how do we measure it, and also how do we collaborate together to make it happen. The other key element is that it's business-led. I think always within the circular economy space, the business case has been crucial, but definitely in the current day and age, with supply chain challenges, with geopolitical unrest, but also with just a tougher macroeconomic environment, I think we start to see more and more that the profit, the business value that it's generating when you move to circularity is becoming front and center. And lastly, it's becoming investment ready. We're starting to see really serious amounts of capital flowing into the space. We see harmonized standards like the ones we'll be discussing today also helping capital providers to move in the space. So against those three trends, I would like to give Jacco the floor in a minute to first introduce himself briefly, but then take us along into all of these newest standards. What has he been observing in this space? And can you guide us a bit in terms of what's new and how we need to make sense of that all? So Jacco, without further ado, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. And yes, happy to do so. I have also from me, very happy to see everybody here today. Such a big crowd. It shows that more and more people are looking into what circular economy can bring to their business and how to use the newest standards for that. So I'm really happy to see that. And I'll be giving a short intro into the latest developments that have been occurring the last couple of months, roughly a year, and some of the innovations that I think are very interesting for businesses to look into. First, the core of today's work is really about businesses focusing much more on the materials they use, the materials going in, the materials going out, where they originate, where they end up at the end of a product's life cycle, etc. And that's not new. That didn't happen overnight. That has been a growing trend over a couple of decades. Some of the earlier assessments that looked into profitability of products or the environmental impact of products, whether it's life cycle assessment or life cycle costing, we're already looking into how businesses use materials and how that works out over a complete value chain. And now the last couple of years, when the attention to circular economy is growing, you see it much more. So now you see a material flow analysis coming at the forefront of business analytics as a key tool for a couple of purposes. And that's not too surprising, whereas for a long time financial metrics were and still are to a certain degree the key metrics, of course, in any business. A lot of analytics are linked to how businesses use materials, whether it's the costs or the resources going in through procurement, through supply chain management, and the money that is spent on that, whether for every process from extraction to manufacturing or use phase, it's the value that it brings to a company, but also the emissions and waste that comes out of these steps. It's all related to material use and the processes to adjust materials into a product or a material for your customers. And that has a link to operations, it has a link to finance, but also a link to environmental impacts. And that's why material flow analysis is starting to become a key asset for all of these kind of assessments. Whereas materials have been getting increasing attention over the last couple of decades, which really started really around the turn of the century in the 2000s with methodologies like LCA, life cycle assessment, coming up, but also the cradle-to-cradle certification scheme and framework that was introduced around that time. But you've seen that in the last couple of years, say around 2020, there were dedicated standards introduced, dedicated measurement frameworks for circular economy performance specifically. And that started with standards like the Circular Transition Indicators, CTI, but also the GRI, the TNFD and B Corp recently. They all are standards to help communicate or measure and assess your circular economy performance. What also happened in recent years is that circular economy metrics, dedicated circular economy metrics, have entered into legislation. Of course, things like waste management, and trade have been managed through legislation for a long time, and those had circular economy aspects to them as well. You now see dedicated circular economy metrics in, for instance, the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, or the EU taxonomy, making that for the first time a dedicated topic. Of course, with all these new standards coming up, another issue arose that sometimes definitions were different, or the way certain indicators were calculated were different. So what you've seen in the last year is that there's now a harmonization effort globally with the ISO, but also the Global Circularity Protocol being introduced. Those provide a global framework, a global baseline for all these legislations and standards coming out. Just like the greenhouse gas protocol and things like that have done for greenhouse gas emissions, that's now happening for circular economy as well. So it's quite a rapid development in just 5 years. And that means that there is some time needed to catch up on that. So, of course, just trying to make it as practical for people out there that want to apply this, we made a bit of a decision tree on which metrics, which frameworks, legislation to focus on as a business in certain cases, especially circular economy being as versatile as it is. You can go quite a few different ways. So here's a very simple decision tree that if you're just looking to start on some of these metrics, and you're doing that for internal purposes, just to start measuring your baseline, for instance, or communicate internally about what topics to prioritize on, then probably the ISO GCP, the harmonization standards out there, are a good way to start. If you're a bigger corporation and you're, for instance, obligated to report on the CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, then of course start there. That's already quite a detailed guideline on what to measure, what to report, how to assess. If you're looking for more practical applications, like in your design, for product design or for marketing or procurement, then of course some of the certification systems out there are more useful. And then you're looking at Cradle to Cradle or B Corp certifications, or some more dedicated certification systems. If it's really to get your sustainability strategy to a high level, if you really want to focus on minimizing the negative impacts of your business, then there are some sustainability frameworks out there that you use, which is the GRI 306 to be precise, TNFD, LCA methodologies, etc. As you can see, it's quite a large landscape. If you're one of the businesses that have multiple targets or multiple objectives for your circular economy assessment, then it's probably smarter to start with the GCP, the Global Circularity Protocol, that's just been launched, like Mark mentioned at the beginning, about a month ago. And why is that? The GCP had the objective from the onset to be a harmonized framework. So be a framework that kind of helps you prepare or be interoperable between all the other standards. This is the way the Greenhouse Gas Protocol has worked, and that's now also the ambition for the Global Circularity Protocol. So if you have multiple objectives and you want to combine multiple standards and certification systems, then probably the GCP is a good starting point to, from there, work towards other standards. I'll just give you now some of the highlights, some of the innovations that have been happening in the last year, so you're somewhat caught up on all of the recent developments. Of course, there's much more to tell here. I can only scratch the surface of what's in these the newest standards, but I'll start with the Global Circularity Protocol. It's the most complete framework to date. As I said, it's there to harmonize, so obviously it did try and get the best practices out of all of the standards and frameworks out there, legislation out there. Another interesting aspect is that it's a protocol to introduce standardized scopes. And for those of you that have been working in sustainability for a while, you're probably familiar with scope 1, 2, and 3 for greenhouse gas accounting. Now a similar framework exists for circular economy and material flow accounting, to be precise. Not scope 1, 2, 3. They tried that, was a bit too hard to make that work. So it's now scope A, B, C, and D. You can see a small visual here. It's a bit too complicated to go into a lot of detail here, but basically it's about how much control you have over your material flow. So scope A and B are scopes that are very close to your business that you have direct control over, similar to scope 1 in greenhouse gas emissions, whereas scope D, C and D are material flows that occur further away from your business that you have only indirect control over or some influence over, similar to scope 3 emissions. It also introduced a few new metrics, especially on dematerialization, that I'm quite happy about because that has been lacking for a while in the circular economy landscape. And what's also quite nice about the Global Circularity Protocol, it has guidance for both beginning users, and smaller assessments, as guidance for very elaborate company-wide assessments. So it's a very big document. So if you want to get through that, be prepared. But luckily, it also has some way to prioritize which elements to use if you just start. So that's the Global Circularity Protocol. What's also very recent is that there's only last week that there is an update to the European Sustainability Standard on Circular Economy, the ESRS E5, which is under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Sorry for all these acronyms, by the way. I didn't make them up. I'm afraid that in our line of work, there's a lot of acronyms. This is an especially important standard because it's a mandatory standard. Things like the GCP and others are usually voluntary. This is a mandatory standard for a lot of the big whales, the big companies in the EU. It covers about 60 to 70% of materials in the EU. It now also has a focus on key materials, so it now asks these big companies to really report on critical materials, materials with large footprints, environmental impacts, or strategic materials. It's very quantitative. I was very happy to see that. So this will give stakeholders, shareholders, general public as well, really hard metrics on the performance of these companies. So I think that it's so quantitative is really great. And it also solves another issue, which is the data availability is usually quite low in especially more extensive value chains. So now for the first time, suppliers have to give some basic information on their circular economy performance to their customers. It's quite rudimentary. It's information they should have quite readily available, but still it's the first time that they have to share that with their customers. So that makes value chain transparency increase. I'll leave it to that. There's much more updates of the from recent developments. Happy to go into that if you're interested. If you just send me a chat message or something like that, or a LinkedIn message. But these are the highlights for me, at least, of the coming months. And I'll hand over to Mark again, because I think we'll be talking to somebody who has much more knowledge on these recent developments than I do.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jacco, for giving indeed that bird's eye view with a lot of highlights, but I think also a lot of further questions on kind of what is the connection between that. But I would like to welcome Delphine Garin to the call. So thank you. There you are. It's great to have you on the webinar today, Delphine, because I think as a manager of circular finance and data at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, you've probably been in the eye of the storm for the last 2 years. I know a lot has been happening. We have been collaborating a lot, but I know you with a lot of stakeholders. And maybe kind of as a starting question also for the audience, I would be curious to understand what was the reason that you as WBCSD and partners felt it was time to launch the Global Circularity Protocol? What was the gap in the corporate sustainability landscape that you felt needed filling?
Super. Thank you very much, Mark, and hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be in this webinar to talk about the Global Circularity Protocol. Okay, so the journey of the Global Circularity Protocol started a few years ago, in 2022 actually, at the United Nations conference called Stockholm Plus 50. So in the lead up to that conference, we brought together 30 companies and global organizations to develop an action agenda to basically identify the practical levers that can help shift global value chains onto a net zero nature positive pathway. And among the 8 transformation levels, those companies identified, circularity emerged as a clear priority. But while these companies recognized the critical role of circularity, they also appreciated that companies faced gaps, such as a lack of a common language, lack of common definitions, metrics, frameworks, guidance to measure circular performance and impact to accelerate this transition to a circular economy. So that's when we developed the idea of a global circularity protocol to provide this common language, a common practice to measure, manage, and communicate circular performance and impact. So basically an overall comprehensive approach that empowers companies and value chain to drive measurable progress toward a circular economy. And, the idea was to replicate the success of the greenhouse gas protocol that WBCSD and WRI co-developed 25 years ago.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think that last remark is particularly powerful. I know in the last 2 years, many people have been comparing the process a bit to where, of course, we stood 30, 20 years ago on the piece of greenhouse gas monitoring and what a critical element the greenhouse gas protocol played in that. I think one of the key elements of that, and again, your organization and the greenhouse gas protocol are elements of that, where you need to convene all the different stakeholders. Because I started my introduction that we come out of an era of pioneering, and pioneering is always easy because basically everyone can come up with their own ideas. They can try it in the marketplace, but it becomes tough when you move in the direction of consensus, harmonization, etc. Can you share a bit kind of on who did you all involve in the making of the GCP and how did you do that?
Sure, of course. So to come back to the GCP protocol, we have followed a similar approach. So basically, the Global Circularity Protocol is a collaborative, multi-stakeholder initiative, and this is key to its success. So the GCP is co-developed by WBCSD and the One Planet Network, which is a program hosted by the United Nations Environment Programme. And we bring together a broad coalition of over 150 experts from more than 80 organizations, from business, policy, science, from across all regions. And those experts contribute to the work through a technical working group and advisory committees. And it's very important for us to get this input and review to ensure the protocol is practical, credible, and globally relevant. So we are developing this protocol with companies in a pre-competitive space so that companies at a later stage can compete on circular performance, but they do not compete on the methodology to measure their circular performance. Maybe to come back to the difference with the GCP protocol. When the GCP protocol was developed, the space was quite empty. For the GCP, it has been a bit different, and Jaco presented very nicely the landscape earlier with the multiple initiatives and regulations. So for the GCP, we ensure that we collaborate with those organizations involved in circularity, like ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, who is in our advisory committee and technical group, to ensure deliverables are complementary. So we reference a lot the ISO standards in the GCP. We actually contributed to the development of the ISO standard on the circular economy based on our experience on the circular transition indicators. So basically all that to say that interoperability is a key principle of the GCP because it's important to understand how the different frameworks relate to each other, to what extent they are compatible. And it means interoperability between the GCP and ISO standards, or with regulation like the CSRD and the standard on resource use and circular economy E5. And we will actually publish early next year correspondence table to really show how companies can use the GCP with regard to those other frameworks and standards. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. Very clear. that was kind of looking back at how did the protocol come about and how many people and organizations were involved in its making. Now, I would like to look forward. So what is the ambition of GCP? Kind of what, let's say in 5 years from now, what would define success if we start to accelerate the transition to the circular economy helped with the GCP? Can you take us along in that success in, let's say, 5 years out?
Okay, and maybe more than 5 years, actually. But the GCP ambition and vision has been defined in the impact assessment that we published last year. In the impact assessment, basically said that the GCP has the potential to reduce by 2050 up to 76 gigatons of CO2. And if people need an analogy, because it's not always easy to figure out what it means, that's roughly equivalent to eliminating nearly 2 full years of today's global CO2 emissions. The potential of the GCP is also to lead to 100 to 120 billion tons of cumulative material savings over the next 25 years. And it has the potential to decrease air pollution by 11 to 12% per year. So that's basically the ambition that we have and the vision that we want to achieve over the long term by 2050. In addition to these environmental impacts, we can add that the GCP has the potential and the ambition to enable the redirection of capital flows to the most circular companies. And this because the GCP guides companies in disclosing decision useful information to finance providers so that they can make informed decisions when it comes to companies' valuation and allocation of capital. In terms of positioning, the ambition is to become the go-to framework that guides companies in target setting, measuring, reporting, and disclosing progress on resource efficiency and circularity. So I think I mentioned it before, that's really the ambition to establish a global common practice with the GCP. Like Jaco mentioned, how companies should measure the circularity of their material flows following the operational boundaries, the scopes A, B, C, and D. If we look at what a successful transition to a circular economy looks like, I think it's a transition that is comprehensive. So it's not only about closing the loop on materials, that is to say, to keep the materials in the economy for as long as possible through reuse, repair, manufacture, and recycle, but that's also about narrowing and slowing the loops through product life cycle extension and also reduction in material use. So a successful transition is a transition that considers the environmental impact to avoid inattended consequences as well, like switching from one material to another and increase carbon emissions. And finally, I would say that the transition is successful when it is recognized and rewarded by finance providers, because they understand how companies mitigate their risk linked to linear materials and size the opportunities linked to a circular economy.
Wow, that's a lot, Delphine. That's
I haven't told you about the next steps yet.
you haven't, but maybe I can. I mean, the ambition you lay out it's huge. I think in all regards, in terms of the role that GCP needs to play, but also in kind of guiding the investment, which I think is a very crucial and interesting element, kind of mobilizing the capital and steering it in the right direction. And you mentioned so many kind of organizations, people involved, but I can only imagine that going forward, and I'm sure that many people on the call today as well might have a question of how do I interact with the protocol, where from basic elements, and we'll actually have some links provided at the end and also in the chat of where people can find the relevant documents. But if you want to interact with the protocol, can you sketch a bit kind of for who is it intended and how can I become a part of this huge ambition that you've just laid out? Sure.
So the GCP is for any company, big, small, from any sector. It's sector agnostic. So any companies that want to transition to a circular economy can use the GCP. It actually includes a progressive user journey that Jaco mentioned earlier. it means that you have 3 levels: initiation, expansion, consolidation in the GCP. That really helps you understand which metrics you should start with, which operational boundaries to use. So that basically companies do not have to do it all from the beginning. How to engage? So anyone can download the GCP from the WBCSD website for free. So anyone can start implementing the protocol. If you need support to implement the protocol, we will set up an implementation accelerator to really help companies with templates, guidance to implement the protocol. So if anyone would like to receive the materials that we will develop, like templates, case studies, they can just let us know, and we will sign the company up. If the company needs more support, they can also refer to an implementation partner. So we will have a list on our website shortly. You can already look into the GCP. At the end of the GCP, in the acknowledgement section, you can see who have been our technical service providers. So with whom we have worked so far, like current. And if the company needs more support to implement the protocol, they can refer to those implementing partners. So feel free to reach out to the GCP team to discuss engagement opportunities, because we will really like to hear everybody's feedback on the GCP. The work continues. I mean, last month we launched version 1, but it was a key milestone. But we still have a lot of work to be done, and really next year it will be about adoption and implementation. So we'll set up this implementation accelerator. At the same time, we'll continue the technical development. So we will have new work streams, one which will be more on finance-related topics, another one on the integration of dematerialization strategies, in the impact of modules. That means the impact of resources reduction on GHG emissions, nature, and social. We'll be looking at developing complementary indicators like total material requirements, material scarcity. There will be also work on data, because we know it's a key barrier for companies to access the data, what data to use from the value chain, and how to exchange data also along the value chain. We will also do some work on target setting, how to set science-based targets when it comes to resources and circularity. Quite a packed program, but maybe I should stop here. That's maybe enough for the moment.
It is, but it's so helpful to understand kind of the history, but more importantly the huge ambition, but also the extended hand and the help you're providing to all people in the space, sector agnostic, as you say. I saw already that some of the resources were shared here in the chat, but feel free indeed to reach out to you, Delphine, reach out to us here if you have any further questions on that. But thank you so much, Delphine. A lot of work ahead, fortunately, but thanks for coming into the webinar today. And please hang around in the chat if people want to have specific questions for you.
Thank you, Mark.
With that, I would like to move back to you, Jacco, because we deliberately called the webinar Beyond Compliance, because all of these frameworks are great as a way of being compliant, becoming compliant, but it also serves the purpose of driving strategy. And I think you're going to elaborate a bit on that. So the floor is yours, Jacco.
Thanks. And indeed, I will move on to a next deep dive into today's topic, which is beyond compliance. So far, it's been a conversation about the standards and frameworks out there and the metrics and how to comply to these standards and voluntary frameworks and legislation. But we firmly believe, as Mark said, that it's not just about being compliant. We started Garin not to help people check the boxes. We want to create some real impact, and I hope a lot of you with us. So that happens in product design, that happens in procurement, that happens in financing the right things, and that's where we feel we need to move beyond compliance. And that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about now, and why that is the case for circular economy and how that works. And the core is really that we feel that it helps you as a business, as an professional to move from a reactive stance to managing your risks whenever they come your way, to being proactive, not just to manage risks proactively, but also capture opportunities, both sustainability and commercial opportunities proactively, and by that, making your business more future-proof. So it's really moving towards proactive stance. And that starts with of course, still looking at compliance. It starts with the fact that circular economy as a strategy is not a goal in itself, is a means to an end. So, and the end can be to be compliant, not with just with one, but with multiple legislations out there. And I've listed here a few. They're not always as relevant for every different business. For some, multiple of these are relevant, and like I said, I think I only listed about a third or so of the legislation now that might be relevant for you. But it can be the sustainable product regulation on design. It can be the recent EU deforestation regulation that's capturing the attention a lot lately. Packaging regulation. All of that can be captured in a circular economy strategy. So rather than having a very diverse and split up sustainability or corporate strategy, you can have one circular economy strategy attending all of these objectives. But then the beauty is that it also connects to different sustainability goals. It's not just about climate and CO2, that's in there as well, but it's also about nature, about pollution, about being resilient and handling scarce resources and critical raw materials. And you can see this is a lot of acronyms here. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to tell you about all of them, but these are all standards, regulations, frameworks out there for all these different purposes. And this is why circular economy is now, especially for the bigger businesses, seen as a very interesting strategy to pursue. It combines all of these. It makes it simple. It makes it into a narrative that everybody can understand, can relate to, rather than just this compliance checklist with all these standards and frameworks and sustainability goals. You now have a strategy that connects them all. And where it gets really interesting, it's not about minimum targets to be compliant. That's the regulation. It's also not about the ultimate targets where you want to get to when you're sustainable. So it's not about just the regulatory goals or just sustainability goals. It's about how to connect the dots between them. So how to move from just being compliant to that ultimate goal of being sustainable. It's a bridge between them. It's an actionable strategy. And of course, I won't dive into that today. That's probably in for a completely different webinar. Circular economy strategy also links very well to some commercial targets out there, whether it's having better customer relations or recurring revenue streams. There are quite a few business models in the circular economy that really connects well to commercial targets of some of the businesses out there. Like I said, that's for a different story, but that's what the beauty of a circular economy strategy. And what's also quite nice about it, it's actionable, and that's where it really starts to inspire change. It's not just about a single sustainability department thinking about sustainability strategy. It connects designers in a single strategy with the procurement specialists, with the LCA specialists, the ones reporting on EU regulation. That strategy bridges all of these activities within a business. And that means that you can tell the same story, whether you're talking to your CFO or to your designers or to your investor. And that's the beauty of the circular economy strategy. That's what makes it actionable. It makes all of these different regulations, all of these sustainability targets into one strategy that inspires a lot of different people and connects the dots within your business. I'll give a few examples just to make this not this high over story, but make it really tangible. I'll start with one of my favorites examples. If you've been in my webinars before, you know that I've mentioned this before. Also because I have it myself. This is my Fairphone. It's a beautiful phone. It's produced by a company relatively small that is really focusing on the design of these phones. They last very long. They come with a manual to really disassemble them yourself. They're modular, and you can replace the battery, you can replace the camera whenever you want an upgrade or whenever it's broken. And circular economy gives you a lot of different labels and metrics and indicators to use here. So obviously there's different legislation on design, on the use of packaging, on reduction of waste, which can help you in this case. There's certification systems like Cradle to Cradle, Ecolabel, but also there's something like the Global Circularity Protocol can already give you some indicators or ways of communicating about the performance of, for instance, a Fairphone or any other phone or any other product. And you can see some of the indicators that are very common in these kind of standards and frameworks that you can use while you're designing your product. Another example is Action, which is often seen as a very surprising one because it's known as a budget store, very rapidly expanding, quite aggressive in a commercial strategy. But for them, circular economy is also very interesting because it allows for a single sustainability strategy that works across the wide portfolio that they have. So here again, you see that circular economy being so widely applicable makes it a very sensible choice as a sustainability strategy. If you do it in procurement, then of course a lot of the relevant frameworks include certification systems that you can just ask your supplier to comply to, whether it's Cradle to Cradle or more dedicated certification systems like the FSC or BCI, the Better Cotton Initiative, or the Forestry Stewardship Council. Forest Council Stewardship certification. And you see some of the indicators coming back here, include recyclability, renewable content, things like that. All things you need to calculate using material flow analysis. And the last example, and that's also where I think it's a nice bridge to also the financial side of things. This is Swapfiets. It's a bike leasing company, so it basically offers monthly leases to bikes rather than their users buying the bike from them. For them, it's a financial case. They adopted circular economy principles not because they wanted to be more sustainable, but because it's a commercial case for them. And for them, things like circular revenue, resource productivity, life cycle costs are very relevant indicators to use. And then again, that also comes back in some of the recent legislation as well. But they would already have been using these indicators even if that legislation wasn't there. So for them, it's very much a commercial case as well. So these are just examples of businesses applying these in daily life. I know our next guest speaker has a lot of experience in that as well, because I know they've been using these kind of metrics for a long time as well. So now over back to you, Mark, for our next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Jacco, for laying out this and also making it tangible. And I would like to welcome Harald Tepper into the webinar, because Harald, if anyone, I've been knowing you for many years as one of the front runners, kind of in an organization like Philips, but also you as an individual, really trying to bring the whole realm of the circular economy really to practice. So I'd like to really dive deep to where the rubber hits the road and how you speak about that. So I think that the first question that I'll have is, how do you, as kind of the title of this webinar, Beyond Compliance, how do you make sure that these frameworks, that circular economy, is a catalyst for change and really for tangible implementation and innovation?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks also for inviting me here. It's fantastic to be here and to see also so many people show up. It's an important topic, and it's a journey. It has been a journey for us as well, but a very exciting journey, and it's not over yet, as Delphine also was saying. So we started as Philips with circular economy around 15 years ago, I think maybe even before the word existed, but at least at the beginning of the journey. And we did that because, I wasn't there, but our CEO really got excited about the topic because of the word economy and circular economy, right? So I really felt like, well, this might be the only way to do business going forward, and it is, right? We have a limited earth, so at some point we are just using way too much material, so we need to change this. But also we saw this as a real potential driver for innovation, and that has proven really right over the years. Of course, in business, things are happening if you measure them. So that is why this topic of today in metrics frameworks is so important as well. But if you start something new where not many businesses are working on yet, then these metrics are not around. So the way we have tackled this, of course, we started with thinking about what does circular economy mean for Philips, where can we play, what are the low-hanging fruits, etc. So building a story around it and building a pilot to see where it would work and where it would make business sense. But then also quickly thinking about if we really want to build this out across the company, then we need to start measuring the progress on circular economy. And we did that with a self-invented metric, again, because there was no standard, and we had a couple of metrics, but the overarching one is circular revenue, where we deliberately chose a financial metric to also show internally and externally the connection to business value. And circular revenue has also evolved over time, but the way we have used this is as a sort of umbrella metric that could add up apples and oranges across this company, because there's so many ways to close loops, and what makes sense for one business unit might not make sense for the other business unit. So even in Philips, since we have a broad portfolio, you have different circular economy strategies. And what circular revenue does is really say, okay, what part of your revenue that a certain business unit makes can be attributed to one of those relevant circular propositions, circular products or services within Philips. To give an example, if a business unit sells refurbished systems, then the revenue of that system is part of our circular revenue. If another consumer business sells a toothbrush with recycled content, then if that is above a certain industry standard, then we count that also as part of circular revenue. And that way, we could indeed add up apples and oranges and make sure that everyone in the company could contribute to the same thing. So that helped a lot. Then I think more recently, a couple of years ago, we started to embed circular design also very deeply into our eco-design framework. Philips has worked on eco-design for decades, but of course the nature of eco-design has evolved over time, and circularity was really not a part of that yet. So over the last 4 years, we added that as well. And since in parallel, we had an ambition to really make sustainable design the standard, it is now something that every single a project lead in Philips that works on a new innovation and towards a new product introduction has to consider these requirements and targets, and has to adhere to them.
Yeah.
And I think the end of this story is then more indeed, or not the end, but maybe the end of the beginning, is the story of today around GCP, right? So over the last years, we saw rapid convergence and on metrics. So GCP is one of them, and CSRD a little bit earlier also, of course. We applaud that a lot because it's one thing to use metrics to steer internally, but if you want to set targets and if you wonder, are these targets now good enough, then you need to have something that's also comparable to other companies, and in the end, I hope also comparable to government frameworks, so that you can really see where you need to go. And that is, I think, the promise of GCP. It's version 1.0, but I'm most excited. I'm excited already about that, but I'm most excited also about what Delphine was saying, that we are working towards science-based targets, because then you can also start to prepare.
Great. Thanks a lot, Harald, and really inspiring on the one hand to see how you have been pioneering with the with also the circular revenue element, but there were actually a couple of remarks now in the chat as well about kind of what is the contribution of GCP of the framework, and I think indeed working across supply chains, as you say, and working on the comparability is of course a crucial element. I would like to dive a bit deeper, and maybe you can bring to light with an example from the Philips context. Where have you seen an innovation in a product or in the business model around the product where that innovation has really kind of improved the circularity and also in terms of the measurements that you use internally?
Yeah. And I had to do so. And maybe before I go into that, and maybe then also responding to that question in the chat, because I did see that question. So we are, as one of the champions involved in the development of GCP, and just because we think it's important, and we think we can offer a lot in terms of learnings based on the last decade of our experience. And at the same time, we are learning from this as well. So I think what it brought to us already, both the CSRD, ESRS E5 and the GCP, is also for us a deeper focus on material flows. Like Jaco was mentioning that also earlier, to really think about, if you look at your company as a ecosystem or as part of an ecosystem, to really go deeper on what kind of materials, products, parts come into your company, what parts leave your company. If they leave, are they left forever, or do they come back? And that's something we are developing more and more, and not only because of the regulations, but because it gives a fantastic dashboard and an overview of where potential leakage is. And because if the materials leak out of your control, then that might not be good for the planet, but it could also be a leakage of business value, of course. So it really sharpened our look at that.
Yeah.
Now, to your question, does it then also lead to impact? So let me dive a little bit deeper then on circular design for today. So as I said, we have embedded this now in the process. So every single designer has to think about this. We have several circular design strategies. Just like I said, there's also circular strategies. So per product, people can really think about, okay, what works the best for this product. And a couple of examples that came out recently, 1 or 2 years ago, we had after Sonicare toothbrush introduced bio-based brush heads, so that the toothbrush heads that you have to exchange regularly. The latest now have 75% bio-based plastic, so really moving away from 100% virgin to a lot more renewable. Other example is one of our latest mobile X-ray machines, where they have really doubled down on low weight design. Also some things about the batteries, etc. But I think the low weight design was quite exciting. So they were able to make this this quite a heavy machine, make it 20% lighter. And the interesting thing is, by that token, it suddenly fits in a normal elevator in the hospital, and the previous generation didn't. So you can imagine what an amazing customer impact this is beyond the planetary impact. And maybe last but not least, because I think it's also nicely exemplary, our Blue Seal helium-free MR systems. So MR systems are these big round machines, and they are so big because there's a big magnet, a circular magnet in there. And that magnet is super cooled by liquid helium. And I didn't know this before I went into this field, but that 20% of the global supply of helium is going to MR machines in hospitals. So that's huge, and it is actually a rare material. So we have seen the prices skyrocketing. And our latest generation machine uses only 7 liters of helium versus 1,500 liters of the classical machines. So this is amazing, and we are, of course, very proud of it. And you see now also the whole field is following this. But I think what it also learned is, and we are now going deeper on this as well, to really go look more strategically at all the materials that we are using, and seeing if we can sort of predict where do we have the most dependency, where do we expect price volatility in the future, to help also strategize on where we should double down on this circular process.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Harald, for all of those great examples. I think that really brings it to light, and I love the continuous interplay with knowing where your materials flow, but your continuous drive to also where does it add value, in customer value, in terms of financial value, etc. We're 5 minutes out to the end of this webinar, but Harald, thanks so much for all of these contributions. It's always too short, but thanks so much. I would like to very quickly move to some kind of quick concluding remarks, but then also kind of give Jacco the floor for some next steps. So this has been a packed hour. We knew that. I think that was definitely what we have seen. Well, if there are, let's say, 3 things that we can take away from this, I think we start to see that there is more clarity emerging, whether it's the CSRD package, which was long up in the air. It's coming down. The Global Circularity Protocol as the protocol moving forward is there. So we're starting to have more convergent, but also kind of more clarity. And I think that's always good news. There was a huge plea also by you, Harald, to go beyond compliance, but really use this as an instrument for strategy, for value creation in all its forms. And I think, if anything, the time to act is now. We're at this inflection point where more investment is going into the space, where we have this clarity, where we have momentum in businesses. So I would love to kind of close it there, but really thanking Delphine, thanking Harald for their contributions on the call, which brought a lot more to light, but also thanking all of you. I think we've seen an overwhelming attention and craving for these topics to be discussed. So thanks a lot for all of you to attend. And please see the QR code here to move to the GCP. With that, I'll say goodbye, but hereby hand over to Jacco for some final remarks.
Yeah, because we have one more update to give you all, and that's that also because of the major attention we got for this webinar and a lot of questions we already got moving towards the webinar, we decided to take the initiative to start a training in the first quarter of 2026. So pretty much on the same topics that we discussed today, how to, of course, for starters, how to do material flow assessment and how to report on all these different frameworks and standards, but also how to move beyond that, beyond the mere compliance. So we'll be doing a training for anyone who feels that they're not ready yet or could be more prepared to measure the circular economy performance of their business. It's quite an ambitious training. It will not just cover the latest legislation, but it will also connect the dots between sustainability and corporate strategy, so how to move from just sustainability strategy to also a commercially viable strategy that helps your business outperform others. We'll do an assessment of your company while you're doing the training, so you'll walk out of the training with the first assessment of your business already done without any external consultants being paid. You do it yourself under our guidance, and you'll end up with a certificate that's by some of the leading organizations, so the Circle Economy Foundation and the World Business Council that was also present today. Both will be backing the training and guaranteeing the proper topics there. So we're opening pre-registrations now. As of today, there's a limited amount of seats available because this is the first time we'll be doing it. So we want to keep it manageable for ourselves. So please do pre-register. The first ones in will also be the first ones served, and we'll reserve a seat for you. And after today, we'll be sharing more details on the program and the costs of the training with you for your consideration. But feel free to already pre-register now free of cost, and we'll send you more information. So that's that for me as well. Thanks again, everybody, for listening in today. Very happy to see you here, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.